Well, good morning, everybody. See, it's been so long since you've been to an in-person conference, you forgot how this works. Good morning. My name is Gene Jones. I'm the executive director for an organization, nonprofit group out of Tallahassee called the Southern Waste Information Exchange. My 30-second elevator pitch is we basically assist industry in municipalities, state government, federal government with waste issues. We conduct a number of different conferences in the environmental sector, recycling, waste conversion, agricultural plastic recycling, and have been doing the MGP symposium since 1995. We decided to take over this. As many of you know, Mike Eastman decided to retire from the industry. And so I worked with Mike and decided we would run with the Florida Remediation Conference. And I thought it was a great idea when I made that decision, until I found out getting into it that it's right before a pandemic. So it's been a learning experience. It is great to see people back together. As you know, we're running two events simultaneously. I've got the MGP Symposium down the hall and then the Florida Remediation Conference with a shared exhibit hall. You guys are welcome to go back and forth between the sessions, and hopefully you will learn on both sides, learn a bit about MGP if you have an interest in the remediation or redevelopment of those facilities. If you allow me, I'm going to make a couple of opening comments. Dave, can you pull up my slides, please, sir? The FRC welcome slides. For those that are joining virtually and everybody in the room, we will be shooting and recording all of the presentations today, both from in here as well as MGP. So you'll be able to go back and forth between the sessions. Come back. Yeah. Hey, Nick, how are you doing, sir? Have a seat and we'll bring you on up here after we get through with the DEP section. And please allow me to make a couple of opening comments. That's the header slide, Dave. Yeah. Don't you love technology? Let me make this comment. Having doing this, we've done, I think, 6 different shows now virtually. I will tell you that in working with things virtually in Zoom, I can assure you something is going to go wrong, but we will do our best to try to alleviate it. Come on. It's going the wrong way. Can you back me up? All right, well, in essence of time, I'm going to move us forward. I need to thank our sponsors. So if you will allow me, let me recognize NREX, IET, Sevenson Environmental, ACT, Action Environmental, ATES, Aerologics, Aquablock, ASTM, BSTI, Burns McDonnell, Cascade, Clark Environmental, Clean Earth, Forgan, Geosyntec, Halls Environmental Services, HEPACO, Tetracon, Universal Engineering, Green Rock, US Ecologies, and Mechanic, Nuco, Hearn, and Wester. I can't stress enough, without our sponsors and our exhibitors, which I encourage everybody in this room to please network in the exhibit hall when we do our functions, our breaks, and our receptions tonight. Please network with the exhibitors. I'm going to move us right into the program. Well, our opening session, we'll discuss a number of different programs related to the Petroleum Restoration Program. We're going to be talking about the new ASTM standard and how those changes are going to affect environmental site assessments. And then Michael Goldstein's going to follow up and be talking about brownfields and minefields and a host of other issues related to brownfield redevelopment. This session is being chaired by Steve Hilfiker, and I've happened to know Steve. We actually, it's going back early 80s, we formed the Florida Environmental Assessors Association. It was a group of consultants in the industry, and I happened to serve. I ran the organization, the association, and Steve was the chair for probably 3 or 4 years. So I got to know Steve, and I know the amount of work that he does in this industry, and I can't think of anybody else better to steer this opening session than have Steve come up here. He's going to share some things with you that I think will take heart to everybody in the room, and I know it will take heart to Steve. So with that, I'm going to let Steve run the show.
All right. Thank you very much, Gene, and welcome everybody to the 2021 Florida Remediation Conference. Can't tell you how great it is to be here live. We're here today to discuss the themes of restoration and remediation. And with these recovery themes in mind, I want to introduce the 2022 charity for the Florida Remediation Conference. It's one of several charities, but this is called the Daniel Foundation. And with those themes in mind, recovery in mind, I would like to introduce you to a new pump. This pump was recently installed in Tampa, and it produced recovery results that are more meaningful and significant than you can ever imagine. And I guarantee you that none of you has ever utilized this pump before. I brought it with me. It's right here. And I had a rare heart disease called cardiac sarcoidosis. And just before the pause hit, I had a heart transplant in August of 2020. And please turn your attention to the screen.
My name is Steve Hilfiker, and my mission is to save lives, to spread awareness about cardiac sarcoidosis, and really to develop a method of early detection. Basically, it's like a protein that infiltrates the heart. The enzymes, protein, I'm not exactly sure the medical terminology, but basically what it does is it infiltrates the heart and it turns it to stone, fibrosis, scar tissue, that type of thing. So OSIS, as I understand it, is itis gone bad. I had the disease for 5 years, and I was in stage C heart failure, so I knew something major was going on. And they told me that steroids might work to cure it, but I kind of knew in my heart that it was too late. I was getting sicker and sicker every day. If I walked a flight of stairs, I'd dry heave. I mean, the nausea was horrible. Massive shortness of breath, dizzy spells, have to hold on or I'd fall down. Nausea, dry heaving. Sorry for the details, but we went in June of 2020. And the doctor, we ran all the tests, did the PET scan, did the exercise tests and all that. And so I went for the results and he says, you're in stage D heart failure and you need a heart transplant right away. Your heart is failing. He might as well have said, you have 5 weeks to live. They got me on a balloon pump in time as my heart was failing. And so I was connected to a computer to keep, life support. That balloon pump kept my blood flow going for 5 days. The near-death experience for me, and I think it's the process of dying, the sensation was almost like I was doing backward somersaults downhill. Sensation was gaining momentum and getting out of control. Where would it have stopped? I felt there were spirits there. There were orbs there, like little kids pressed up against the glass. Like, I don't know. Was it my mom? Was it my best friends? Was it people there welcoming me? I got 7 heart offers in 3 days. So certainly God was looking out for me, and gratitude toward the donor, the unbelievable gift, the sacrifice, the pain that they must be feeling for their loss. His name's Daniel. very sure we're very connected. And my children still have a father. My life has been given an extension, but for them, they've had tragedy and loss. I'm just eternally grateful. The name of the foundation is the Daniel Foundation for Organ Donation and Sarcoidosis Awareness. One of the main goals, if I had to boil it down into one statement, it would be early detection, to find a method of early detection for cardiac sarcoidosis, because people are dying from this disease and they don't even know they have it.
Okay. Thank you. There's more to the video, but we cut it short. It actually gets better. And there's several other videos that we're working on as well with the foundation. I'm a fighting gator, but my nephew, not ashamed to admit, he went to the Florida State Film School. And they graduate 30 people a year from that film school. He ended up in Hollywood. And, you know, with the help of my friends and family, my church, this is a family mission. And the donor was only 32 years old. So I got an extension and I got energy like you wouldn't believe. And it has allowed me, if anybody know me, if you know me and the types of things I've done over the last year and my whole career, I'm very passionate about striking the balance between environmental protection and economic development. Also about the petroleum program and the things we'll be talking about today. But with 32-year-old energy, I'm here before you to talk about the last year and what we've accomplished. And I will continue in leadership roles with rejuvenation, with revitalization, with restoration, with redevelopment. Are we picking up on the theme for today here and the parallels between the story and what we're here to talk about this morning? So I will continue my day job. I will continue as president of ERMI. And I will continue with the leadership roles as on the board of Florida Groundwater Association, technical committee chair of Florida Brownfields, and other things I'll talk about in a minute. And, you know, they tell me my hair is getting darker. I don't know, the power of a 32-year-old heart. My fingernails, I have to trim them 3 times as often. I mean, it's a pain, but I wouldn't change a thing. So, you know, life is good. There's more to the story that I'll love to share with you in breaks, but all I know about the donor is he was 31 at the time of the transplant, and his name's Daniel. And I got a letter from his younger sister. So if you know the Elton John song, Daniel, Daniel, my brother, you are older than me. And I got a letter from his younger sister. The lyrics of that song are exactly right on to this story. 10 days after I learned that I needed to have a heart transplant in 2019, or that I was heading that direction, I saw Elton John in concert. And the video on the screen behind the drummer was a young man laying flat on a table, no shirt. This is unexplainable. Looked like me. Ages to an older man in the video, looks like me now. And I can't tell you how striking the lyrics of the song are to the story. So there's video on that. We're reaching out to Elton John. If anybody knows Elton John, let me know, because I'm trying to get hold of him. He's coming for 5 shows here in Florida next year, or next April. So he's a man of causes. So, you know, this could help out. But I'd like to read you a quote from the European Heart Journal. It was written in 2019 about cardiac sarcoidosis. This disease is life-threatening and often not found until after people die. Nearly 2/3 of deaths related to cardiac sarcoidosis are caused by undiagnosed granulomas in the heart. And that was true in my case. I had this for 5 years before it was ever diagnosed. Got a clean bill of health since, I want to stress that. But I share this to you for several reasons. Someone here, or some of your friends and family, you may have cardiac sarcoidosis and you may not even know it. Okay? So please let that sink in for a little bit. Listen to the symptoms that I'll explain in a minute. I have a duty to share this story. This story must be told. It's found in autopsies. If you ever heard of someone who had cardiac arrest in their 40s and 50s, and everybody said, isn't that a shame? Chances are they died of cardiac sarcoidosis. So Symptoms that started for me, had 104-degree fever in February of 2014, but I was fine the next day. Mayo Clinic says you're exposed to something. They think maybe green tree pollen or whatever you're allergic to, or they don't know. That's part of the foundation. We want to find a cause. We want to find early detection. If there was a blood test and they said, okay, you got these symptoms, take this blood test, you got sarcoidosis, here's prednisone, here's your steroid, you'll be fine. It would have saved me a couple pacemaker surgeries and a heart transplant. But after the cough, the strange cough, many of you may remember, I couldn't even get through a speech. Dizzy spells, shortness of breath, heart failure symptoms. If you have any of that stuff, go to your doctor and ask about cardiac sarcoidosis. The second reason is foundation purpose. And the steroids kill sarcoids. It's a treatable disease. This is not like, this is a treatable disease if there was just a blood test. So the goal for the foundation is early detection. But the third reason to share this is the parallel theme of resiliency and restoration. I'm going to kind of shift into the panel discussion at this point. Because I'm revitalized personally with energy. So is the Petroleum program, well on its way. Thanks to a lot of help of a lot of folks in this room. I want to make a quick note that 2019, 2020, I was out for a long time. Years ago, I set the company up so I could focus on CEO and industry association activities and really focus on industry leadership and helping establish or develop or contribute suggestions to environmental policy after the years of performing environmental forensics, working hand in hand with the DEP. We were able to develop some pretty good ideas and assist. So ERMI operations never missed a beat. Sorry for the poor pun. But while I was out in 2019, 2020, things continued smoothly through COVID, and I can't thank the team of environmental risk management enough. So thank you from the bottom of my new heart. So in 2020, my heart failed. I essentially died on July 29th. I got 7 heart offers in 3 days. Heart transplant August 3rd. They expected 40% exercise recovery. I hit 209%. 90 days after being discharged from the hospital, I climbed Sharp Top Mountain in Jasper, Georgia. It's recovery. Medical technology is amazing. Meanwhile, I'm having a transplant August 3rd, and there's this thing called the Revenue Estimating Conference going on August 7th of 2020. And they projected a $5.4 billion shortfall heading into last year's session. Followed shortly thereafter by the PRP pause. So I wake up from ICU, talk about a wake-up call. It was time for revitalization in more ways than one. In September of 2020, I look around the room here and I see a lot of friends that were involved in helping. We developed something known as the Informal Coalition of Environmental Assessors, Environmental Associations. And I called, rallied from some friends, Florida Groundwater Association, Environmental Professionals of Florida, FAPG, Florida Brownfields Association, Florida Engineering Society, ACEC of FL of Florida, FAEP, people like Mark Eichenholz, Scott Lado, Joe Applegate, Jorge Caspary, Robert Brown, Glenn McGraw, Joe Matrai, Neil Wilson, Mike Scarangella, Mike Hill, Bob Finger, Scott Lado. I think I mentioned Scott because of how much work he did to help. Scott twice. Thank you, Scott. We Zoomed every week or every week during 2020 and every other week in 2021. And we informed legislators over the value of the petroleum program, the drinking water protection, groundwater protection, real estate transactions dependent on the cleanup program since 1986. We connected with the Florida Bankers Association. This program is so important to lenders. They rely on this program, how important it is for the economy, the jobs. Most importantly was the institutional knowledge that was lost, unfortunately, due to the pause. We need to get everybody back now that the funds are back. with the powerful help of valuable legislators like Kevin Cleary with EPOF and Ryan Matthews with Florida Groundwater Association, and the participation of stakeholders and practitioners like you, we met with DEP officials and key legislators, and our white papers hit the desk of every legislator in Tallahassee. We heard words like these are most impressive white papers we've seen. We tracked the Department of Revenue data, and I'm pleased to say that we are on a run since May of over $23 million a month in receipts in the Department of Revenue for the Inland Protection Trust Fund. That's a pace of $280 million a year, which is higher than it was before the pandemic. The economy of Florida is restored. This work produced a very, very favorable 2021 General Appropriations Act, and we're starting to see the benefits. $15 million was encumbered in the month of September for the Petroleum Restoration Program. It's well above the average, so we need to get things on track. And in October, it hit $11 million of encumbrances, and that's the average that we need to look for going forward. If we're going to be doing remediation projects, the informal coalition is focused on three things right now. One is inflation and the material costs, the rising material costs. We've submitted a letter to Secretary Hamilton to address that matter. Continuing to focus on funding to maintain the petroleum program years going forward, and to work on processing efficiency. We've got a long way to go, but I can tell you it's happening. So we can be pleased for that. Obviously, population growth has put pressure on our water quality, water quantity, our resources, and our springs. Listen carefully, please. The environmental policies that we set now will establish what we're looking at 50 years from now. So our legislative activities and our decisions on environmental policy that we make now are vital for Florida's future. And our panel here today with, I don't know if you realize the panel we have here today. In addition to the PRP, we have one of the nation's leaders in brownfields, Michael Goldstein. He'll be speaking with you on brownfield and revitalization. You got one of the pioneers in the industry, Nick Albergo. Nick, thank you for starting this conference. Thank you for the work that you've done and so many things as ASTM, one of the original authors of ASTM. And Nick will be presenting to you the changes that recently came out through ASTM E1527 for phase 1 environmental site assessments. Before we get to Nick and Michael, we have 4 presentations from the Petroleum Restoration Program. Natasha Lampkin is the PRP administrator. And Natasha has been working with Petroleum program for 25 years. She's going to provide program status and overview. That'll be followed by John Wright, the chief engineer of the Petroleum Restoration Program. His presentation is petroleum contaminated site remediation, then and now. John's been with the DEP for over 34 years and worked with the program for 30 years. Next is James Treadwell, who will be discussing petroleum site closures under 62780. James has been with the program for over 20 years and will be presenting on a variety of matters related to site closures. And I'm not quite sure if I got the order right, but hopefully this is the order you're presenting in. But then Matt Ingham will be talking about advanced cleanup for redevelopment. And Matt has a bachelor's of science degree with chemical engineering and has been with the program for a number of years, working for Team 5 for nearly a decade, and then served the petroleum program. And we'll be talking about advanced cleanup for redevelopment. Natasha, it's been a pleasure working with you, particularly over the last year. And thank you, PRP, for all that you've done to get us back on track. So with that, we'll turn it over to the program and we'll go till about 9. Turn it over to Nick Albergo and Michael Goldstein at 9:30. Thank you.
presentation.
Do you-
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for being here, for joining us today. And thanks, Steve, for the opening. That's going to be very hard to follow. He asked me if I was ready for his surprises, and I said yes, but I wasn't, I can assure you. So I'm going to jump right into. I might have to get you to.
The green one is forward, red
That's-
one is backward.
That's what I'm pushing. See? The green light's coming on. There we go.
Oh, the green- yeah, green done that. See the screen now.
So he kind of introduced this, but I want to tell you how happy I am to have all of our engineers here. In addition to myself today, our chief engineer that's been with us forever, John Wright, and James Treadwell, our assistant chief engineer, and Matt Ingham, also an engineer and a team leader. So very well represented here today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the program's laid out for those of you that need to reach out to us. We have 4 different teams up in Tallahassee. As I said, Mr. Matt Ingham is the team leader for Team 1. He does advanced cleanup. He does performance-based cleanup. They do site management, but he also does difficult site review, which may be very interesting for you guys. So when we get into more complicated cleanups that, we want to discuss further how to proceed, his team heads that group up. Also on Team 2, we have Mr. Kim Busen is a PG, and he is also our team leader. They do our forensics contracts. They do the PCPP program and work on site access. And I know many of you guys were very happy when site access rolled over to us from the contractor. So, and our consultants, that was a good move. Team 3 is our local programs and our private teams. That's held up by Miss Susan Fields. As you know, we have a lot of site managers across the state. We have 12 local programs. We have 2 private teams, and we have 4 teams in Tallahassee. And then we have the Team 4, which is our agency term contracts team that heads up the team that manages our consultant contracts. We have 133 contracts with 63 different companies. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the program progress. Steve touched on that a little bit, but look at our closure rates. So, and one of the things I want you to kind of focus on is we had that high closure rate of 738. And the reason I have assessments right beside this chart is to point out that, you see the little bleep back there around 2014. That's when we were doing the site characterization screening. So those are sites that closed after assessment. That was paused as the program changed, and we rolled back into a lot of LSSI and LSA. So we've assessed the majority of our eligible sites. And we got the closures for those that, could close after assessment. So as you see, we're going to change, and how we're moving forward are the sites remaining are going to need some type of approach for closure. And that's going to be the focus of the rest of our panel's discussion, or, approaches to closure. But I wanted to kind of show you how this is playing out, and then show you the remaining assessments. If you look there, it looks like about 300 sites still need assessment. That's not that many in the realm. Now, I do want to clarify, this means they've had an assessment report. It doesn't mean they've been fully assessed. As you know, like with LSSI, we may stop our assessment as soon as we realize it's not going to close. But what this does tell you is that the sites remaining may not be likely to close after assessment. So talking about the status of our eligible discharges, our data here is pretty much from the beginning of November. We've made some, we've been moving quickly in the program recently, but we have, we're active on about 25% of our eligible discharges. But if you look at that, we've already closed over 60% of our eligible discharges. So there's less than 15% waiting. And this shows the ones that are awaiting discharges by score. And if you look at the, we have one right around 75. Those are usually things such as they've exhausted their funding. We're working on access or there are legal issues with moving forward. But as you can see, we have very few left in the higher numbers that aren't actively moving forward. So I also want to talk about our remedial action plans approved. This includes all remedial action plans, but as you see, we continued to approve remedial action plans last year, even with the pause. And this would be small adjustments, small source removals, or large $1 million projects. These are our active remediation that we will and have been implementing. So average days to issue purchase orders. I also think that this graph tells quite a story of, how we moved forward when the program changed and understanding how we can achieve our goal. We ourselves have a goal of about 30 days. And what you're going to see there with the little bleep of 31 and 33 days, that's when we were doing a whole lot of construction and source removals. Those don't go out as quickly because we have to get quotes. And, quotes take a little bit of time. And by we, it's you guys usually are getting the quotes. And so the source removal, the constructions are a little bit longer to go out. As we were not doing as many of those during the pause, our time frame went back down, of course, but we do expect to see that go back up a little bit. And I'm hearing that getting quotes is a struggle right now after the pause for consultants. So we might see quite a change there that, how that plays out as we move forward and revamp. So talking about just millions and what's obligated and carryover and how that works, you kind of can see what we've been spending and our range and where we're at this year already. I think that this also, the dark green number on the far right, that tells you how we've stepped right back up and how we're moving forward. I know Steve touched on it, that we're constantly, even since the pause, have been periodically every 6 weeks to 2 months, rolling in more and more sites and more activities that we're doing. And right now we're moving quite quickly on getting funds out and getting purchase orders out. And I hope to continue to do so. So I do want to talk about what we're not currently funding, because I think that this is often asked. The only thing we're not currently funding is remedial action construction on site scored less than 25, source removal on site scored less than 25, and site assessment on site scored less than 25. There's exceptions to every one of those. So if you're a SERFA or an advanced cleanup, remedial action construction moves forward on any site, regardless of score. We've got free product recovery where we're removing free product on sites less than 25 for source removals. And then we've got site assessments for, LSSI, and now we're doing LCARs for advanced cleanup. So I am talking about all activities, regardless of what is needed to be done at the site. All appropriate activities on site scored 25 or higher are moving forward at this time. So site scored 11 to 25. We're still doing pilot tests now, remedial action plan on any site scored 11 and above. So these are the activities that, regardless of score, move forward at this time. And I just kind of want to touch on them. Of course, advanced cleanup redevelopment sites, surface sites, the LSSI sites, free product recovery initiative sites, continuing O&M. If we have O&M out there and it's appropriate to continue running it, regardless of the score of the site, we're proceeding with that. Post-active remedial monitoring, that's generally about a year. We're continuing to do that. Well abandonment, anything that is a safety concern, we ask you to, regardless of score or what needs to be done, bring it to our attention. We can move forward with anything that's of concern safety-wise. And then, of course, we're doing the verification sampling for the PVC so that they can proceed. And I'm going to thank you for your time today.
Good morning, everybody. Congratulations on that recovery, Steve. We had no idea. That's very exciting. Wow. Glad you're here. And I'm glad to be here too. It's been a while. Good to see a bunch of familiar faces, old co-workers and friends out there. And today I'm going to talk about, should be a fun topic, easy topic, to tell you the truth. Well, unless you can switch to Wright, I don't know.
I'll cover for you here for a moment. Okay, so with the next presentation, it'll be Matt Ingham. And the 4 PRP presentations will go in a row, and hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. So next up is Matt Ingham.
All right.
Thank you, Matt.
Sorry for the confusion. There wasn't room at the table for me this morning, but here I am. So good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Ingham. I'm one of the environmental administrators for the Petroleum Restoration Program. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about advanced cleanup for redevelopment. So first off, you need to know what advanced cleanup is. So advanced cleanup was enacted by section 376-30713 Florida statute, implemented in 1997 to allow site owners to apply for funding ahead of their priority score and pay for a portion of the cleanup. The current statute does not have any score limitations though. So there are 3 choices that you can have for advanced cleanup. The individual advanced cleanup, performance-based cleanup bundles, which we call PBAC, and then advanced cleanup for redevelopment, or ACR as we like to call it. So here's kind of a quick overview of all the 3 little programs in the program. So again, you got the individual sites, you've got your PBAC bundles, and you've got your ACR. There's an LCAR requirement only for the ACRs now, not for the individual site or the bundles. There is a 25% or more cost share. So there's either an owner cost share or a contractor cost savings that's required for the individual sites or the bundles. And then the ACR, there is no cost share required. And all this is based on the new 2020 statutes. So for the individual sites, kind of self-explanatory, you got 1 for a bundle, you need to have at least 5 or more sites. And then ACR is also a single site agreement. So performance-based cleanup kind of goes with the name for the PBACs. So those have to be PBC. And the ACRs are mostly PBC. And then the individual sites, we just do kind of like normal. So then there's a max statute limitation per year on some of these. For individual sites, there's no max per year, except for the whole yearly allotment max, which we'll get into that in a second. For the bundles, there's a $5 million max per bundle. And then for the ACRs, there's a $1 million max per bundle. And those are all statute limited. So now, I guess this slide did make it in. So this was a late addition. So this really is just a quick summary of all of our kind of where we've been since the beginning of advanced cleanup. So we've done 269 individual agreements for a total of $37 million and a total cost savings to the program for $10 million. We've done 158 sites and bundles totaling $54 million and a cost savings of $25 million. And then ACR, there is no cost savings because there's no cost savings requirement, but we've done 24 of those for a total of $17 million. So we're really putting a lot of money in the industry with this. All right, so here we go. Here's a little bit of description of the individual advanced cleanup, and we'll go through each of those that you saw in that little table. So there's 2 application windows per year. This is also defined by the statute. Each year we accept applications in May and June and November and December. There is a $200 non-refundable application fee. And then, like I said, there's a statutory limit of $25 million for all the advanced cleanup that gets split up between the 2 application periods. And like I mentioned before, each of these require a 25% owner cost share or a contractor cost savings. Then that's a statutory requirement in addition to any other eligibility requirements such as PCPP, which has a 25% copay requirement. All right, so your PBAC bundles. Again, same application windows as the original. So we received those at the same time. The same application fee. As I mentioned before, there's a $5 million max per owner per year to participate. And then it requires the same cost share as the individual. And the real topic for today is the advanced cleanup for redevelopment. So advanced cleanup for redevelopment, we receive applications any time of the year. They're not limited to just those 2 windows. The same application fee, same non-refundable application fee. There's a $5 million total statutory limit across the board or for the entire year. And let me tell you, the money goes fast. There's a $1 million max per site per owner per year. And just to kind of explain that a little bit, like if an owner actually has, say, 2 sites that he wants to redevelop and get in this program, we could offer him, say 2 times 500,000 or something like that, or 700,000 and 300,000. And you'll see an example of that here in a little bit. And as I mentioned before, there is no cost share requirement. And then it requires, one of the big obvious caveats of this is it requires property redevelopment. And actually more of a proof of property redevelopment. So like you have to have a financial proof and actual municipality approval of the redevelopment. So let's get into the good stuff. Some examples. So these 2 sites right here are downtown Tampa. These were actually the first 2 ACR projects that we ever did. These were Terracon actually submitted these. And this is the first example, like I said, of the $1 million limit. So as you can see, there was 2 sites. This was the city of Tampa. One site had $700,000 for the agreement. The other site had $300,000. So that was their total yearly $1 million. They were both eligible for funding under EDI. Oh, I'm sorry. The one was PCPP. A bunch of these are EDI. So let me look it down here real quick. So EDI with a priority score of 10. The agreement funding was $700,000. Both of them had excavation with dewatering was the remedy. With chemical oxidant mixed in the backfill, and then chemical oxidant injections kind of around the perimeter. And these you may have seen if you've been to previous FRC, because I'm pretty sure that Terracon presented on these. So some of these pictures might look a little familiar. All right, so pretty quick and simple. First step was removing the tanks from the ground, disposing of them, and then starting the excavation. Here was a quick look from a crane, I believe, at both the sites. And from what I understand, these sites are literally like the mayor of Tampa can like look down at these sites. And I think before this was just like a parking lot. So they started off by digging one side. This was the fleet maintenance side. You can see some dewatering points around the edge, the sheet piling. And then there was the dig from the other side. The mixing of the oxidant. And again, dewatering points all along the side. Backfill completion. This was, DPT injections of the chemical oxidant around the perimeter. Because I mean, this plume actually extended way off site. So this was sort of the remedy to try to keep things around the perimeter and do a little bit of off-site treatment. Beginning of the redevelopment. And kind of what it looks like today. So great success there. Second example is BP Palmer, as we call it. We don't get into all the numbers there, but another site that's EDI eligible with a priority score of 10. This one cost, or the agreement was $704,636. Again, excavation with dewatering. Again, chemical oxidant mixed with the backfill. And this was redeveloped into a hotel and retail space. And just, excavation with dewatering, I mean, if is one of the just quickest ways to get the job done. So here's one shot of the site before it got started. And I can't remember what that sign said right there. I think it was like a hotel. Oh yeah, no, visitor information. Another little shot of the site, lovely. So again, excavation, you see the dewatering point, sheet piling, mixing some oxidant with the backfill. Like I said, pretty much the same old story. And this is what it looks like today. This is downtown St. Augustine. Heck of an improvement from what it was before. Yeah, it's pretty cool. All right, and the last one, and you're going to see more about this. I forgot to mention, the last one was done by West Environmental. So this one here is another Terracon job, and I believe you're going to see more of this project later on in the FRC. This is another site. This was a CSX transportation facility in Lakeland, Florida. Another one that's EDI eligible with a score of 29. This one took another $1 million. Again, excavation with dewatering, more chemical oxidant mixed with the backfill, and redeveloped into Bonnet Springs Park, which when this is done, I really want to go visit. This place looks super cool. So there was the site before any work got started. Like I say, it was just a big CSX field. Again, looking at a hole in the ground, people digging, more digging, mixing with the oxidant in the backfill, starting redevelopment. That's one of our monitoring wells with some above ground casing for protection. Continue the redevelopment. And I took this from their website. This is a little artist rendition of what it's going to look like. And I mean, this place, it looks awesome. And I think that does it for me. So I do appreciate it. And if you see me around, you want to know more of advanced cleanup, just hit me up. So appreciate it, everybody.
Thank you, Matt. And see what comes up next. Is it John or is it James? What do you think? 50-50. Either John or James will go next. While we're bringing that up, are there any questions at this point? Try to make the most use of our time. James, looks like you're up. So prepare your questions. We're going to try to have some efficient questions before we switch to Nick at the end.
Good morning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about site closures, conditional closures, which are often a part of site redevelopment or real estate transactions. And I'll be brief. Have you heard that one before? That's usually a disagreement about what that means. Let's see. Do we have the technology? Oh, which one is it? Big green. The big green one.
The big green one. Move forward.
Oh, that one. Okay. All right. Not smart enough to do this. This is the website that has institutional controls guidance, which is, I'm speaking about conditional closures. This has a lot of information and a lot of the template forms on it to help you get started on the institutional control process. A lot of you have done many of these. I review a lot of these before they go to the Office of General Counsel. So the biggest thing, the main thing is to keep the main thing, and it has to meet 780, and there's certain things we have to look for. The biggest thing is it needs to be protective, protect people's health, protect the environment, and has to meet the 780 rules. Usually a groundwater plume needs a buffer around it. You see, just so that a well put right outside the restricted area won't move the plume. This is a little bit extreme example, but the whole property is restricted for the one well there. So for groundwater, some of the main criteria, the plume needs to be stable or shrinking on site and less than a quarter acre for RMO2. You have to have a year of monitoring to show the plume stability. So soil direct exposure, if I'm coming through. So if it's, of course, if it's less than the commercial industrial target levels, you can restrict the property to industrial use to deal with your direct exposure. Or you can use an engineering control, usually 2 feet of clean fill or impermeable surface. The engineering control has to be certified by a professional engineer, and you put it on you survey it in on a separate document. So for soil leachability, we usually have, usually it's an impermeable surface. There's, as always, these are all site specific, and there's more than one way to get there, but just the general cookie cutter one, engineering control like a pavement, or you could put a building on it. And a demonstration that contaminants won't leach above the rule criteria. Or sometimes that they won't leach to make the plume any worse than it is, so that it continues to be stable. So this is not impermeable, not a good engineering control. And this one repaired, repair the cracks in it. And the other thing you can do is put a building on it. So there's my building I put. If you get too close, they taunt you from the towers there. If you don't go away, they will taunt you a second time. And there's sharks with laser beams in the moat there. So that's a good way to restrict access. Okay, some this kind of generic requirements. There's the technical rationale is like, why is this protective, basically? And attachment 5 from that web page that I showed earlier is helpful to kind of get all your ducks in a row to make sure you're meeting the criteria. Attachment 6 is something that's required before it goes to OGC. You need a copy of the deed, legal description, and the noticing, which is used to be published. In most cases now, it has to be mailed notice. And then if you're restricting only a portion of the parcel, which they often do for soil, they'll mark out a smaller area that covers the soil plume. You still do legal description of the entire property, and you survey the restricted area. And if your closure involves offsite properties, then they have to agree to have their property restricted, and it makes it an RMO 3. All right, so that's conditional closures. That's my contact info. And I look at a lot of these for local programs, some for team 5 and 6. I look at a lot of these before they go to OGC. So. All right, thank you.
Thank you, James. And now we'll have John Wright, Chief Engineer for the Petroleum Program.
So you see the W, I'm used to going last. I was kind of surprised I went second. So as I was saying, thought we could take a look, remediation then and now. I thought it'd be kind of fun and easy to easy talk to go through. So this is what we're dealing with, a petroleum contaminated site. I love this. I think this is EPA slide showing the different phases where contamination gets trapped. I've been doing the petroleum remediation for about 30 years. Started with state cleanup, then the pre-approval, and now we're doing the procurement. Well, my very first job was a dishwasher. So the expanded part there reminds you of some of the work I did when I was doing the dishwashing. That's where especially breakfast dishes, where the eggs get stuck on the plate. So that's the tough part. My other job was a car wash, which is love bugs, but that's kind of gross. But anyway, that's what keeps these remediation projects going, is that smear zone phase. And you also see the dissolved plume and the soil contamination and the free product. So the first stab at this, we did pump and treat. You all remember that? We put submersible pumps, sometimes pumps for product, pumps for groundwater. Try to collect the contamination separately and treat it separately. Try to get the drawdown capture zone. So the critical design features here, the depth of the recovery well, the space in the recovery well, and of course the number of wells. You could have electric pumps, pneumatic pumps, and I think there was a rule of thumb, like 20 pour volumes you could pump. You could, that was your design. You thought you'd be done, but anyway, there were a lot of problems with the pump and treat. Left a lot of contamination. We ended up having to go back to a lot of sites. So this just shows we still use some of these tray strippers, pack tower strippers to treat the groundwater. And some of the issues, pump fouling from either the iron fouling or the hardness of the water, air stripper fouling, the Gary would foul. And you see long cleanup times for these pump and treat systems. Some of the current uses, plume control, low concentrations. And Gordon Dean reminded me that the PFAS is, I think we're going back to pump and treat on some of those remedial projects. And this, I don't know how many people had to deal with a fouled submersible pump. This is kind of what it looks like, the iron fouling. So the other one of our favorite technologies, air sparging, vapor extraction. You can see where you put in blowing air below the water table, creating vapors and vacuuming it out with the vacuum blower. Pretty good practical technology in a lot of cases. Some of the design features you have to look at, the rays of influence, you have to determine your sparge weld depth. You have to look at size of equipment. You got enough pressure to break out, get the air flowing. And the same thing with the vacuum. You need enough vacuum to capture all the vapors that you're creating with the sparging, and then you'll have to treat the vapors with the either a thermal unit or a carbon system. So some of the issues we see with sparging, you'll see short circuiting, preferential pathways develop under the ground with air channels. You'll see treatment well fouling, and routinely you'll see contamination rebound. You'll have to maybe start the system and then stop the system and then start it again, and try to continually to clean that aquifer. So as I said, this is the most popular technology. We still use it a lot. Works best in sandy lithology. Is a little tough if you got tighter clay situation. And one thing we've learned is the spacing is critical, especially in that smear zone situation with the fried eggs. You want to hit that hard and get that mass out. I still stick to scrambled eggs for some reason. And this just shows a sparge compressor with a heat exchanger to the right to cool the air down before it goes into the ground. Vacuum blower taking the air out. Little knockout tank on the right. Multi-phase extraction we've used for groundwater as it applies multi-phases. It'll recover groundwater product and contaminated vapors. Typically with one pump, you get the drawdown and drawing all the vapors through the soil and the groundwater. Try to minimize the groundwater recovery because it can get again lead to fouling of your treatment system downstream. Some of the design considerations, again, the spacing, the number of wells. You're going to have to treat the any recovered water and vapor. It can get quite expensive. And the fouling of the system. I've seen beautiful trace shipper turn orange pretty quickly because of all the iron fouling that comes out that you're pulling out of the ground. This shows a liquid rigging pump, high vacuum pump to recover the multi phases. Some of the issues, as I mentioned, the fouling of the system and the disposal, and you'll see these is typical for dewatering sites. Prior to source removal, you'll see they'll just kind of have a high vacuum pump to pull trying to mainly lower the water table, but they use it for dewatering. And for tighter lithologies, it can be effective because you'll have a higher vacuum and you get more flow through the soil. Source removals, we do this as Matt mentioned with the ACR sites. It's a quick, it's favorable technology for quick cleanups. With the larger diameter augers, some of the design, you'll have to consider what kind of flowable fill you're going to put back into the augers, whether you're going to need a cased or uncased borehole. Now, with conventional excavations, some of the things you have to worry about: the sheet piling, sloping, and then pay attention to the backfill and compaction. And this is another source, but we've seen quite a few of these. And just want to show this large diameter auger with they're actually shaking off the contamination, and after they've gone to some depth and taken it out. Okay. I think Matt showed this as the site in Tampa, another source removal with the dewatering, and And some of the issues we run into, sometimes you don't have access to all the contamination. We've seen damage due to sheet piling, even a block away into some tidal lithologies, you get ground shaking and cause damage. And with the LDA, you see, because of all those concrete and the lime you're putting back in there, I've seen pHs 10, 12 and 13 after an LDA excavation. Sometimes you have to dewater, and that'll lead you to having to treat and dispose of that water. This is pretty common on clay sites, tidal lithologies, and sites where you can easily access the contamination. Go ahead and dig it up while you can. In situ bio, we do quite a bit of this. Just shows the mixing tanks for that, I think it's biological system. They're going to do the injections. You have to further your design, you need the product volumes, radius of influence, and then critical distribution of the chemicals to get in contact with the contamination. Injection pressure can be an issue. Also, some of the other issues, you can have daylight, and you can have the contamination. Like I got a picture of that coming up where you don't really want it. Some of the parameters, some of the things you inject can have a higher iron, sulfates, nitrates. And then you're always worried about getting a good distribution of the chemicals. High injection pressure, I mentioned that. Current uses, we see some for primary treatment, and they'll end up going back several times, or more typically for polishing off sites. And this is just an example of daylighting where the ooze is coming out through the cracks there. So kind of the lessons learned to wrap this up. And you'll see some of the presentations later that sometimes a combination of technologies will be needed. You might do a source removal in a system, or some kind of injectant after that. Source removal, when you can get at it, is effective. And you may need to adjust your design, add more treatment wells as you go along, and use risk-based closures when you can, and the situation allows for it. And that's it. Thank you.
I'll say thank you to our PRP panel, and we're running a little short on time. I want to make sure we save time for the remaining panelists. I get questions all the time, so I'm going to maybe head off a few questions at the pass. One I know that's common on everybody's mind is the material cost, inflation. And as I mentioned before, we presented a letter to Secretary Hamilton that's running its way through Deputy Secretary Truitt regarding inflation. In paragraph 11C of the agency term contract, the matter is addressed as far as a potential surcharge. So we have made that request as a coalition. I wanted to say that if you're interested in getting involved in the informal coalition of environmental associations, that's a work group. We're working on things like a 5-year strategic plan. We've sent out a request for people in the coalition to submit their top 10 things that are working and their list of top 10 things that need improvement. And with that, we're going to collaborate, and we'll be working directly with PRP to continue on the theme of processing efficiency. My number one on that list would be natural attenuation monitoring. We had a nice conversation last night briefly with regard to how to properly do natural attenuation monitoring. But just so you know, there's roughly 4,700 active sites in the PRP. 1487, roughly 1,500 of those sites are in NAM. That's 31%. And it's about $12,000, the statistic are per year for NAM. That's $18 million that's being spent on some sites. Okay, some sites are working if the biological criteria are there for attenuation. Some sites, we're just producing a 37th quarter monitoring report, and it's really not helping anything. So that money could be utilized for remedial construction. I think there's some improvements there. So that's one thing we can do. And we're coming up with a list of other sites. So I want to thank Kevin Cleary, Environmental Professionals of Florida. If you want to get directly involved, join one of the associations that have a lobbyist, also Florida Groundwater Association and Ryan Matthews. They have been terrific and we need support. We need to continue the fight to maintain funding, because the most important thing for the successful conclusion someday of this petroleum program is consistency in funding. And that is not going to happen unless the practitioners in this room get involved with the associations, continue to help us through the associations that fund the lobbyists, that get access to people like Lawrence McClure in the House, Josie Tomkow in the House, Senator Albritton, Senator Pasadomo, Senator Simpson. We have to have access to these decision makers to continue the appropriations that are necessary for the encumbrances, and because the IPTF funding is there. And I'll save time for breaks for further discussion. If anybody wants to talk more about these matters and how to get involved, please let me know. Let's take a moment if there are any burning questions out there. If not, please email me them and we will address them as a coalition as we continue to increase processing efficiency with the help of the department. And the cooperation has been terrific. I have to say the department has been responsive. Michael?
Exceeding. Hi, Michael Goldstein. Quick question for Matt with respect to the advanced cleanup program. I'd love to know how quickly and often they are exceeding the annual statutory cap. There are lots of projects out there that don't know about this aspect of the PRP. And if they learn about the program in June, July, August, September, is it more likely than not that the money will have run out?
So quick answer, we never go over the statutory limits, or at least not since I've been there. And I don't believe it's ever happened. And second part of your question was,
Well, the second part is if you don't have enough, you never have enough applications in a given year to exceed the $5 million.
so, okay, so maybe I misunderstood. We have definitely, especially with ACR, received more applications than we have money, and they kind of go into a backlog for the next year. So we have definitely, this year, we've probably got, I think about $2 million into the $5 million. So there's about $3 million left. The first year that ACR was around, I think we spent the $5 million before December. And then we had a backlog going into the next year. But we don't spend more than that $5 million per year. But like I say, we'll make a backlog for the next year and then, keep things going.
Oh,
yeah. Thanks.
I'm gonna do something. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Matt. Well, thank you, everybody. That concludes our PRP panel. Most of you know Nick. He probably needs no introduction, but I'd like to say a few words that I think are very significant. You guys need to know who this guy is. If you don't, Nick was the former chair on environmental assessment for ASTM E50.02. That's the task group that writes the ASTM standard that produces and is the guide for all phase ones conducted throughout the country. And Nick was involved as a primary author of E1527. EPA requires that the standard be updated every 8 years. And so you see the 97 version, the 2005 version, the 2013 version we've been working on for 8 years, and it's led to complications. So thank goodness we have the 2021 standard out that has recently been released by ASTM. Nick was involved in all that, and thank you for your hard work. Nick is now an engineering professor at USF and a senior advisor to GHD. He was the founder of this and keynote speaker of this Florida Remediation Conference. He's been involved in all aspects of environmental policy and development for dry cleaning programs, phase one, and other programs throughout the state and the country. Very, very distinguished career. I'm honored to introduce Nick Albergo to talk to you about the ASTM standard.
Distinguished enough to know how to use one of these. Oh, okay, cool.
There you go.
So I don't have as cool of a story as Hilfiker, but as of today, I am 10 hours clean and sober. So for those of you that are struggling, I'm available to assist. Where's Atterbury? Is he here? Let's hope I can make it through a half hour without fucking things up. So as you heard, yeah, I spend most of my time now polluting the young minds of the next generation of engineers at the university. Most recently, the dean assigned me the task of also teaching engineering ethics, which is kind of, I mean, I've been a consultant for over 30 years. I'm kind of on the other side of that issue, but I do the best I can. So anyhow, I'm going to give you just a 40,000 foot level of what's going on with the new phase one. I realize most of y'all don't actually do phase ones, but some of you may review them either as part of your job because somebody younger is doing them, or you have to review them as part of moving on with remedial design and so forth. So I can't see a damn thing. That'll make it interesting. This is just a couple of small things, and EPA is constantly changing the names of their databases, so we've just gone to websites now, and that should solve all that problem. We clarified this concept of de minimis. For those of you that are less familiar, the concept of de minimis has always been, look, there's been a release of some schmutz, and it's on the ground, but it shouldn't be a big deal. It shouldn't result in regulatory enforcement, shouldn't result in, imminent threat to public health and the environment. It's de minimis. What was happening prior to 2021 is people were calling everything de minimis. It could still be in a 55-gallon drum and they're saying it's de minimis. Just keep in mind what we've done now is we said, no, there has to be a release to the environment on your property before you even talk about something called de minimis. So we got that cleared up. Data gaps have always been a big pain in the ass, right? Because we got all sorts of different kinds. We have data failures, data gaps, limitations. And one of the issues the attorneys have, especially with 2 of the 3 defenses that require that you did not know and had no reason to know of a recognized environmental condition, is that if there is a data gap suggesting that you can't make the call, that could somehow impact your ability to get the defense. So what we've done now is we've defined something called a significant data gap. And if you've got one of those, it's going to wind up in your conclusions section now. And it essentially says, look, we couldn't fundamentally do something we're required to do by the standards. So let's say we're working on a foreclosed office building. The owners just got foreclosed on, so they're not letting you inside the building. They don't like you at all even being there. So you did most of the work, but you didn't go inside the building. Well, that's a data gap. Now the question is, it's significant. Well, if it's an office building, are you that worried about a release to the environment outside the building, the result of the Xerox copy machine? Probably not, right? So it doesn't wind up in the conclusion. On the other hand, if it's a metal plating facility that you can't get in and it's been there for 40 years, that's a problem, right? So what we've done is we've tried to codify, if you will, what the difference between a data gap and a significant data gap is, so that we have an idea of what the users should be concerned about, what they don't need to be concerned about. Some practical considerations. Over time, the concept of a local agency interview, which is one of your primary interviews. Remember, you're supposed to be doing owners, key site manager, local agency interview. Well, that is somehow morphed into nothing more than you writing an email to a local agency and saying, hey, you got any files, right? And that's now considered the interview. That is so far removed from what we ever thought. The whole concept of a local agency interview was about satisfying good commercial and customary practice and addressing things that are obvious, Okay, because that's what the Superfund amendments required in 86. So the idea was that if you're from, Idaho and you're doing a phase 1 in Florida, you may not know that we've got, cattle dip vat database. It wouldn't show up necessarily as a standard record. So the idea was you call somebody local and say, hey, is there anything else out there that you guys normally do? Or that is obvious, that's something I can get easily that I wouldn't know of otherwise through using EDR or ERS or whatever. That was the whole concept, okay? And that is really starting to come to roost now, because ultimately we're going to have to deal with a number of issues. And one of them is going to be emerging contaminants. Now, technically, we know EPA hasn't called them a hazardous substance yet, right? But if you're in a state where they have, and there's like 8 of them that already have, and there's also statutes and regulations and standards for that PFAS as an example, then it is good commercial and customary practice, and the information's obvious, and you better do something about that. In the state of Florida, we're not really there yet, right? We got shut down during the last session on a couple of the PFAS bills. And so we in the state don't call it a hazardous substance, nor does EPA. So it wouldn't necessarily show up, but it's coming and you need to stay on top of it. There's other instances, how do we handle, dredge material, dredge spoil that was put on these spits back in the 40s and 50s? Well, is Wilbur here? I don't know what happens in the kingdom of Wilbur, but for the rest of the state, you have situations where if you've got that fill material on the property, but it was put there before there were regulations, sure, it's going to be chock full of arsenic, but that doesn't mean there's been disposal or release. And if you don't have that, you don't have a wreck. Okay, even though in your mind, you're like, well, of course it's a wreck. Well, no, it's not. And so understanding these local regulations and the details is a bigger deal, which is why I freak out when people go do phase 1s in other states without understanding what they're getting into. Because typically what happens is they're not getting past that local agency review, and then it winds up back in my lap as an expert witness. And I feel bad because oftentimes people did a decent job. They just didn't do the right job. So we have now emphasized the interviews as well as the documentation, which I'll get to in a second. Air is another biggie, right? We've always thought about contaminated soil, contaminated sediment, groundwater, surface water. We haven't done much in the terms of air. And even from a standpoint of vapor, we always talk about vapor migration, but not vapor intrusion, because that's an OSHA issue. But start to consider what we're seeing in Inglis with Raytheon and Pinellas Park, where you've got entire areas impacted, the result of something that happened from a point source. That is and could be a recognized environmental condition just based on the fact that it moved, particulate matter moved through the air and wound up deposited on the site. We don't normally do much about that. Why? Because we've gotten so damn lazy about just looking at EDR and saying, well, what's next door? What's adjoining? What's within a half mile? And not paying attention to the nature of those operations to understand the possibility that you could have via deposition a problem. So I see those things falling through the cracks. So we've also put in some emphasis on air. The last one is really scary in my mind. And that's the concept that, are these sources credible to a reasonable person? And that's the litmus test. Now, how many of us actually look at our own files to see if we've done a phase 1 on that site in the past? Okay, it's embarrassing, but it happens, right? Where you find out somebody before you had actually done something on that same site, but because the client changed, you weren't easily make the connection between the address. And then you find out that not only did your company do the phase one, but they had a different opinion back then, right? So conflict of interest checks, checking your own files could be argued that that is what a reasonably prudent person should do. So we've also made comment on that stuff to try to, I've got a court case right now dealing with that issue. And it's just very problematic. They had done 2 geotechs and 3 environmentals, and the new guy had no idea about any of it. So, let's see. Adjoining property. So for those of you that are in the know, you know, adjoining property is property that's not necessarily adjacent, but is only separated by a road or thoroughfare. So we always had this situation where we wanted to review the reports and the records associated with adjoining properties. And what was happening is in our historical aerial reviews and our review of databases is we were doing that, but we weren't bothering to see what was under the road before it was a road. And that's probably the biggest issue, is what used to be there before it was I-4, right? The fact that we're reviewing the property a quarter flipping mile away on the other side of I-4, well, I guess that's nice, but that's not really the question. So we've brought people back to say, hey, don't just look at technically what an adjoining property is, but look at whatever that thoroughfare or street was before it was a thoroughfare or street. So oftentimes, as we know, those types of properties are taken through condemnation or eminent domain, and they're often commercial in nature. And so we've done something to clarify that up. This is a big pain. Self-directed cleanups. What are we going to do with them? Well, first and foremost, whether you call it a de minimis cleanup or self-directed cleanup, they're not going to show up anywhere in the standard databases, right? Why? Because DEP doesn't know anything about it. EPA doesn't know anything about it. You did it because it was a small enough spill, or you could get rid of it in 30 days, right? Did I do that right? Yeah, that's de minimis. All right. I'm out of the business. But so the idea is, if you can do that, you don't have to tell anybody a damn thing. Now, the problem is we still have a situation out there where there could be a site that may or may not be cleaned. Certainly wasn't clean to clean. We know that. At the very least, maybe they did it to commercial if it made sense. And there is absolutely no data. There's no report. There's no sign off by the DEP or anything. So without those controls, this is just the Wild West. So what we've done now is we're going to emphasize the importance of you documenting what you do know and how that impacts your opinion. So the most important thing at this point is document that you ask the question of the owner and the key site manager. Have you ever had a de minimis or self-directed cleanup on this property? Because it's the only way you're going to get that report. And you're not going to be able to argue that it wasn't obvious or it wasn't reasonably ascertainable, because if someone afterwards asks the owner, they're going to say, yeah, of course I would have given it to you, but you never asked for it, so I didn't know. Okay. So self-directed cleanups are a big deal. I'm going to get into the documentation here in a second. So what we're saying is, when it comes to situations where you're trying to determine rec or no rec, we're emphasizing that we want to see in that report, in your opinion section, your supporting rationale, your logic and reasoning for having made a determination rec, C-rec, H-rec, because we're not getting that right now. Now, we can agree to disagree on anybody else's opinion, but the idea is, can someone else who's reviewing your work, can they understand how you got there based on your rationale, based on the supporting documentation? Okay, that's going to be a huge general theme. Now, by the way, the standard just came out 2 days ago. All right, it's been published now. So now we're all on the clock to make these changes. So you can imagine there was a huge argument between the users and the EPs when we got to this idea of like, all right, well, what is it you're looking for in terms of this logic and this rationale and so forth? And what we decided was, look, at the phase one level, especially considering the expertise of most phase one assessors, we don't require that you opine on the applicability or the effectiveness of the control. Okay, because that really, for the most part, is an engineer's job, and rarely do engineers get out of their seats to do phase ones, right? They wind up signing them, which is another problem, but we don't put that much effort in, okay? So certainly not for $2,000, right? So what we said is we're not going to require that. You don't have to go into that level of detail. But we do want to know what instrument, what legal instrument are you pointing to, and have you provided it to show us why you think it's an HREC or a CREC, okay? And we want you to identify what limitations might have been associated with that. For instance, is it commercial property? Is it residential property? In other words, enough so that the user, the person that's getting this document, has an idea of what they have and what they may still need, not only to get their defense, because let's face it, right? 99% of our clients don't know what the hell the defenses are. They could care less. They just want to know whether their property's clean or not, right? So try to help with that, we've got to understand that when we start to get into the world of activity and use limitations, that's going to be a challenge because we're already de facto saying it's not clean. So what is it? So essentially, what we're saying is when it comes to self-directed cleanups, if you've got that situation, you need to provide the data regarding what they did. And then you're going to opine whether it's acceptable or not. Okay. I don't need you to tell me whether you think 3 samples was enough, or whether you think they looked for the right stuff, they went at the right depth. I understand that that's a lot of extra work, okay? We're not requiring that. But if you're going to present an argument that it's not clean, that it's still a wreck, you need to provide the data so someone else can look at it too. Okay, so it's all about the concept of documentation. And that's going to be a big deal because ultimately our clients have to make a business decision as to whether or not they want to go back into that area where the cleanup was done and do more investigation or let it go. Keep in mind, the question's going to come up if they need a defense. Did you know or have reason to know? And the issue is if you've told your client, hey, there was a cleanup out there, but no one watched, the DEP was never involved, and it's just in the ether. And by the way, at a phase 1 level, we're not doing anything about it either. Well, if the user needs to understand what that means to them, okay? So you need to provide that kind of documentation. Another thing, does the control still apply? And the biggest issue we've got with that is zoning, right? So oftentimes we make decisions about risk-based corrective action based on zoning, right? Is it residential or commercial? Well, the challenge with zoning is zoning changes all the time, and there's no requirement at the zoning board that environmental issues come up at all. Shit gets changed all the time, right? And so you might have at the time done a cleanup to commercial, but now it's residential. Or maybe you never anticipated people using the property because it's commercial, but now they put in their own daycare and they got the kids from the company running around in the soil outside. How is that to be caught? And that was probably the biggest issue with the phase 1. How are we going to move and morph this document into a more practical, user-friendly piece of work that provides them with the ultimate question, am I good to go or not? Okay. And so the key here is because zoning does such a horrible job of protecting anything when it comes to environmental, and especially in the cases of de minimis and self-directed cleanups, there's nobody involved. You need to identify, especially in instances where you think the cleanup is inconsistent with the current zoning or what's going on, okay?
2 minutes plus questions.
What's that?
2 minutes plus questions.
Okay, 2 minutes plus question. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Ooh, let's take a second here. Okay. Environmental profession. We talk now in terms of what your responsibility is. So especially for those of you that co-sign, how many of you co-sign reports? Come on. Okay. So you're supposed to be involved in the planning of the interviews, the site reconnaissance. You're supposed to be reviewing and interpreting the results and the conclusions. Okay. That is a very tough nut to crack if your sum and total involvement is 1 hour on the fucking job the day it went out. Okay. And why does that happen? Well, we know why that happens, right? Because there's no budget. And so we do the best we can, and no one wants to take the time to have to deal with write-offs afterwards. So screw it. We put an hour on it, we let it go. That's fine until you get sued, right? Because now you're screwed. Now it's either, this is how much time you put on the job, and they're going to say, and if you, of course, if you say, no, I put more on, oh, so you lie on your timesheets. How often do you lie on your timesheets, right? Right. And keep in mind, it's a federal offense, right? If you got federal projects, right? And if you say, well, no, that's how much time I put in. Well, you're not going to satisfy this. So I don't know what to do about that. Thank God I'm out of the business. So very quickly, before I take the question, that's one of my classes. That's my ethics class. I take them to the bar at the end of the semester. And they got me this year. That last year, they had a special learning disability kid in the class who got like an extra hour and a half above everybody else. Somebody got to that kid and said, you're going to spend all the time you have working on that final, because I would give the first kid out of class my credit card to go to the bar. And I said, when I finally show up with the last kid, we're going to cut it off, right? Well, I sat with this kid for a flipping hour and a half, right? I'm like, aren't you done yet? No, I'm almost there. We get to the bar and everybody's like, hey. And I thought they're cheering for me. No, they're cheering for the kid because they got an extra hour and a half and charged me 6 G's. All right, anything I can answer? I know I got a potty mouth. I'm sorry, I'm a professor. Yes.
Gordon has a question in back.
Nick, I am told that EPA has not approved the 21 version and that technically the 2013 version is still in effect as far as all appropriate inquiry.
Both are, actually. So it's true that EPA hasn't given its final sign off. However, one of our main committee members is the EPA lawyer who's in charge of providing the sign off. And she's the one that allowed us, the gatekeeper that allowed us to publish. So both 13 and 21 are good to go. I don't think you need to freak out because next week you're still using 2013. But I would say January 1st or so forth, you got to start making that transition.
Any other questions?
Did you have one or no? You're good? Oh, here we go.
I wanted to ask, you talked about we should explain our reasoning for our opinion. And I know some consultants, partially because of budget, don't really explain their opinions. And also I think I've heard, the more information you give about your rationale for something, the more that can be picked apart. So they tend to keep it brief and just say, oh, it's a wreck, but you don't explain why, because if you don't explain why, no one can pick it apart. So I wanted to see your opinion on that.
Well, we fixed that now. We're saying, no, you're going to start providing that rationale and that logic and the documents themselves and your reasoning. We're not going to allow that anymore because it's gotten to be the Wild West where there's a lot of inappropriate application of these conclusions and it's making things very confusing. So what we're saying is we recognize you're allowed your opinion. We're not trying to get in the way of that, but you're going to provide your logic, reasoning, and documentation to support whatever that opinion is. If someone else disagrees, that's their right to disagree, just like it's your right to have an opinion. But you're going to put forth the information by which we're going to have the discussion or the debate.
Right here.
Hey, Nick, I had a question about the term responsible charge that I saw in there. And so for PE's responsible charge is a defined sort of standard of care. So how did you guys define that term, which can mean different levels of the standard of care to folks?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, with PEs and PGs, the definition of responsible charge and the criteria actually resides within our licensure, right? It's our license that describes and discusses what the requirements of responsible charge are. So because we're automatically EPs de facto by definition in ASTM, the way that negligence or gross negligence is addressed when it goes to litigation is through your licensure and not ASTM. ASTM just uses the words that we know exist within the licensure. And the thing to keep in mind is that while most of our companies have a contract that says, listen, you can sue the company, but you can't sue the person that authored it because they're our employee. That only works with negligence. If there's gross negligence, they'll sue your ass as well as the company. Okay? And that gets brutal. That's a big boy's game. So just keep it in mind, especially those of you that have a license.
I have a final question before we, one more question in back.
Hello, thank you. Are there any technologies such as AI applications you see being implemented to keep track of documentation and regulation purposes?
Yeah. And the only thing that makes me nervous is what we all have that tendency to do, where we pull the last one off the shelf. We hopefully catch all the shit from the last one when we're making the new one. But there's these companies like Choir. Did I say that right? Choir, that are actually a report writing template that uses AI, where it starts to understand the ASTM terminology and what you're getting at, and it'll throw in these sentences, not only terminologies and definitions, but throw in these sentences to trigger you to say, there's a UST. Do you know how old it is? How long it's been, what it's made of? Does it have overfill protection? And it'll start to trigger based on just the word, other things you should think about. So yes, it's out there. The only thing is you got to be savvy enough to be careful that you don't wind up having things that are irrelevant, either because AI screwed up or you used a template from the last job that came off the shelf.
All right, and thank you. One final question. With it obviously critical importance to protect our water quality, protect our green space, the pace of redevelopment and population pressure, if redevelopment doesn't happen quickly enough, then developers are going to go to green space and impact, that impacts stormwater controls, water quality, things like that. On the issue of former or current agriculture, if there's no maintenance area on a site, agriculture is operated through best management practices, which require label application per manufacturer specification on the label. So if there's no maintenance area and you've got a formerly or currently cultivated field where lawful application is provided, the definition of a recognized environmental condition is based on the term of a release. Well, normal legal spraying is not a release. Would that be a rec?
It's not a rec. There are any number of exclusions to the circular release definition. You can read the appendix to the standard and it'll give you the detail of those exclusions. They include agricultural practices and pesticides. They also include other details like vehicular exhaust along the side of our roads, where of course we can get a sample and it's going to have lead or whatever, right? That's excluded. There's any number of exclusions. By the way, one other thing is we finally defined what likely is. We have a definition of likely now. Okay. Remember, it's either the release or the likely release. So no more of this. It might be, it may be, it could be. None of that works anymore. The definition says it's to be expected by a reasonable person with the experience. If you're going to go the release direction, that's in there as well. There's a lot of other details, but that's 40,000 foot stuff. Okay.
Thank you very much. And there's lots more information on the ASTM. If you're interested, please touch base with me during a break. And now Michael Goldstein, managing shareholder of the Goldstein Environmental Law Firm, here to talk about brownfields as minefields. And I'll skip over the abstract, but there's a few things you need to know about Michael as well. Not only just a Martindale Hubbard preeminent chamber partner, rated attorney, but a major aspect of Mr. Goldstein's environmental legal practice involves support of real estate and business transactions. So a great segue from ASTM into Michael. But Michael has a national reputation as one of the leading and most innovative brownfield practitioners in the state of Florida. Mr. Goldstein was the founding chairman of the Florida Brownfields Association and served as its chairman and president for the first 5 years of the organization's existence. In January 2006, Michael was appointed to serve on the advisory board of the Bureau of National Affairs, highly respected environmental due diligence guide. In 2008, he founded and funded the Goldstein Brownfields Foundation. In 2009, was appointed to the executive committee of the National Brownfields Coalition. Like Nick, Michael is a pioneer in this field. And without the work and passion that Michael has put in toward the Florida Brownfields Association, brownfields and redevelopment would not be where they are in the state of Florida today. With that, I'd like to introduce you to my friend, Michael Goldstein.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, can you hear me through this mask? I'm a brave environmental lawyer, but when it comes to COVID, I remain intimidated. It's wonderful to be here. Like Nick, I'm eyesight challenged, so I brought up my laptop and we'll just have to see how this works. Steve, we're glad you're still with us. That was an incredible story that's continuing. I'm devastated hearing it, but just thrilled to hear it at the same time. And I'm going to be a supporter of the Daniel Foundation, and so will our law firm, and I hope many others will be as well. An important message.
Thank you.
This presentation is a 3-day seminar, and I'm going to try and collapse it into about 25 minutes. There are some things that I would have wanted to put in the presentation that we won't have time for. I'll talk about that in a second. But before I get into the meat of it, I want to just say a few words about some of the remarks that preceded me. Bonnet Springs Park is a wonderful project. The developer is a client of ours, and there's a brownfield story there as well. They have successfully applied for almost $1 million in voluntary cleanup tax credits, and that enhances the story and emphasizes the wonderful toolbox that the state of Florida has created for environmental redevelopment. Bonnet Springs Park. Nick's presentation, excellent as always. And let me say this, thank you to Nick for starting the conference. Thank you to Michael Eastman for carrying it for so many years. So wonderfully, this is the finest technical conference and the most important technical conference in the state of Florida. I feel that this conference is in strong hands with the wonderful Gene Jones, who has made a career of expanding everyone's knowledge base in this room and far beyond. Nick talked about responded to a question regarding the switch to the new ASTM standard and what does that mean for AAI and where is EPA in all of this. Just a brief update, a friendly amendment to Nick's remarks. EPA will be soon issuing a rulemaking to confirm that the new standard, the 21 standard, may be used to satisfy all appropriate inquiry. ASTM has submitted documentation needed to begin the formal process. It is anticipated that in the interim, EPA will issue a proposed and interim final rule to recognize the revision standard. but it may be up to 6 months before EPA formally recognizes 152721. 3 recommendations for consultants in the interim. Number 1, continue using 152713 until EPA formally recognizes 21. You can't go wrong with that. Number 2, you can go ahead and implement 21 because nothing in 21 is less stringent than what's in 13. And finally, continue to reference 13 as compliant with AAI and add a phrase that the assessment also incorporates the new 21 standard. Nick also importantly, critically, smartly focused on the changes to the various definitions of RECs, CRECs, and HRECs. This begins to tie into my presentation because I've long felt that there was a tyranny of the REC, and that's especially so in my world, in the redevelopment world, which requires a paradigm shift. We'll talk about that as I get into the presentation. On the cleanup side, it's a very linear process. On the redevelopment side, it's the opposite of linear. It's circular, and there are many other considerations beyond those that fall neatly within the definition of an REC. There are, generally speaking, 2 categories of users for phase 1 reports. Those who don't want to have anything to do with cleanup, who are looking for a way to have a report function as a shield to any regulatory responsibility. And like this gentleman over here, they want to stick their head in the sand and go on with their lives. There's another category of individual, of user, who understands the concept that a very smart environmental lawyer taught me as a young lawyer, John Barquette. I don't know if anyone here has worked with him, one of the longest serving environmental lawyers in the state of Florida. There's always a day of reckoning, always a day of reckoning. So regardless of what a consultant can conclude and fit neatly into the definition of a REC, a CREC, or an HREC to warrant not rendering a recommendation to conduct phase 2 testing, if there's something in the subsurface, it's going to get disturbed during redevelopment. Better to recognize it on the front end than hide behind the definition of an REC, a CREC, and an HREC. And so I'd like to introduce a new concept, a PREC, a practical recognized environmental condition, or a QLAD REC, QLAD, quacks like a duck, REC. If you're on a site and it looks like it may have had a release, and you're confident that history tells you if you put a shovel in the ground, you take out the dirt and you test it, you're going to come up hot for agrochemicals, as just an example. You've got a duck on your hand, and your counsel to your client needs to conform to what your expectations are. We're going to get into that in short order in the presentation. We're calling this brownfields as minefields, technical strategies, environmental outcomes, and client expectations, create regulatory and legal risk for consulting professionals. This really should have been called brownfields as minefields, but still goldfields, because there's not only a lot of risk, but still a tremendous amount of opportunity. And we want to help you through this presentation navigate the two. My goal is to offer ways to find you more business, to elevate your practice, to bring more sites to your clients, and to keep your clients on task and back from the ledge when the going gets tough, as it most often will. I want to talk a little bit about the brownfields market in 2021. When I last gave this presentation in 2019, I described the market as peak brownfields. I'm now describing it as super on fire. I don't quite understand it in one respect because we're still struggling with the pandemic, but in another respect, I do understand it because the pandemic has created interesting market dynamics that is surfacing a lot of impacted sites and creating opportunities for users, consultants, lenders, and lawyers. So clearly the market for redevelopment is very hot. We're going to discuss in this presentation certain market trends, low-hanging fruit, and why we are in both a seller's market and a buyer's market. We're in a buyer's market because brownfields typically carry a significant discount from fair market value. But we're also in a seller's market, but not a seller's market in the sense that they can command high premiums for impacted sites. That's the exception, not the rule. But because there are so many resources and vehicles and strategies and methodologies available that reduce the risk for users and buyers, and we'll talk about who those are in a second. Point in case, we're helping a client now who has a site that's hideously impacted with chlorinated pesticides and chlorinated solvents. The contamination is in soil and groundwater, on-site and off-site, and it's off-site in a major way. At last count, we have 13 impacted off-site property owners, none of whom are happy about the situation, none of whom are inclined to accept a deed restriction to deal with their impacted groundwater. The client bought the site for $500,000 and in 15 days is going to close on selling the site, divesting itself of all of the cleanup obligations, which would have taken at least 10 or 15 years, at $8.5 million. And the reason for that is because we have a very hot market for that type of asset, which is logistics, industrial. We have best-in-class environmental consultants, and we have a strong brownfields program that limits environmental risk. Buyer's market, seller's market. So it's important that we understand these factors and recognize that redevelopment is ready for us, for the consulting industry, now more so than ever. It's important that as consultants, we become ready for redevelopment. And you can see in the bullet points underneath that concept of be ready for redevelopment, what that means. And we're going to go through these factors one by one in the presentation. On the right-hand side of the screen is a proprietary analysis that we conducted of all of the tax credit transactions, voluntary cleanup tax credit transactions in the state of Florida going back to 1998. This is a subset of that analysis looking at tax credits successfully applied for by local governments. And I use this as part of a brownfields index, if you will, that we create to gauge what's going on in the market. As you can see, local governments who are traditionally among the most risk averse and conservative of brownfield users are very, very active in this program. City of Orlando, for example, has successfully applied for 25 tax credit applications going back to 2007 and has brought in $5.2 million in tax credits back to the general revenue fund. And then there's this whole long list of other local government users that also speaks to the market. 35 local government entities, for example, successfully applied for tax credits under Florida's Brownfields program from 1998 to 2019. And what you can see is that in the aggregate, these 35 local government entities submitted 255 tax credit applications, representing dozens and dozens and dozens of projects that were fully approved for an aggregate amount of almost $25 million in tax credits. And by the way, for those of us who don't understand how a local government can use state corporate income tax credits, local governments, like any other user who can't use tax credits like limited liability corporations, sell these tax credits on the secondary market. The question we get as lawyers, and I'm sure you get as consultants, is if I can't use the tax credit, how do I monetize them? They're sold on the secondary market, typically at 90 cents on the dollar. We'll go through that analysis briefly in a moment. The follow-up question is, well, does anyone buy these tax credits? And the answer is yes. There is a very robust market for buying tax credits in the state of Florida. And as part of our analysis, looking at all of the tax credit sales through January of 2021, you can see on the screen that we've identified the top 10 buyers who have been active in the market for almost 2 decades: banks, insurance companies, large corporations. Let's talk about some macro brownfield trends and try and understand how that can feed our business, but at the same time create risk, malpractice risk that we want to avoid. What are our best-in-class brownfield assets? This has changed somewhat since 2019. There's no hotter brownfield asset and no broader canvas for great professional fees for environmental consultants and engineers than agricultural sites. In Miami-Dade County in particular, there's an upside and downside to that. We'll talk about that in a second. Broward County, and of course in Palm Beach County and in Central Florida, citrus groves, row crops, nurseries, golf courses are always very active. In fact, they're so active, Gene Jones and I will be hosting a 3-day conference on contaminated golf course reuse next year. More on that shortly. This is new to the list. We're seeing this all over the country, not just in Florida. Former coal-fired power plants, where the economic opportunity for consultants is not just on the cleanup side, it's on the closure side, the decommissioning, the decontamination, the demolition and the salvage, and of course the reuse. And then finally, anything municipal. We represent at least a dozen local governments that are bringing utility works campuses, wastewater treatment campuses, and old landfills to the market, creating lots of opportunity. In terms of your clients, we've seen a tremendous evolution from the entrepreneur back in the 1990s who had a high level of risk tolerance and a lot of cash lying around to go into these sites and roll the dice. That then transitioned into accidental users who discovered that they had an environmental issue that they couldn't shake free from. As the brownfields program at the state and local level evolved, we found that conventional companies were incorporating cleanup into their programs and strategies, like big box retailers such as Lowe's and Home Depot, and even some developers, large planned community developers like Lennar. And now we're back to the opportunistic user, but it's a different type. It's not an individual entrepreneur, but it's private equity, bringing hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars to our market sector to seek out in a very methodical way where these sites are. What are the hot reuses? We see a tremendous amount of affordable housing, multi-family affordable rental on brownfield sites. We've got over 70 of them in the Florida Brownfields program right now. Counterintuitively, because multifamily market rate is not brownfields friendly, single family detached home planned community market rate is a massive brownfield opportunity. We are seeing large citrus groves and large golf courses being redeveloped for these single family detached homes. And of course, you've got the arsenic and the chlordane and the dieldrin and the toxaphene that you have to deal with day in and day out on those projects. Industrial is the hottest driver right now because of the way the pandemic has changed our market economy. The thirst among lenders and developers and end users for large canvases to put big box warehouses is impressive. Municipal reuse of brownfield sites for recreation facilities and park facilities is also significant. And then we're seeing best in class users from the corner gas and convenience store industry also taking up a lot of brownfield sites. In terms of reuse scenarios that are not brownfields friendly, big box used to be, not so much anymore, not because the risk has changed or the cost has changed, but because the market economy has changed. In Florida, we don't have a renewable portfolio standard, and so there's not much reuse of brownfield sites for renewable energy. And then, as I mentioned, market rate multifamily is not that brownfields friendly. Lenders have gotten over the hump that existed in the 90s and the early 2000s about lending on brownfield sites. I have a list here of all of the lenders that we routinely deal with on complicated environmental issues. They seem to get it. I mentioned in the previous slide how we have the private equity funds coming in looking for brownfield sites. What you can see at the bottom of this slide is the way in which the number of inquiries and clients we're getting in our little shop from private equity increasing from 2018 to 2021. In 2018, we had 21 inquiries and clients, and through October, we had 33. Let's talk about the money. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Florida Brownfields program, I'll go through this very quickly. It's a popular program because it funds cleanup that otherwise would not occur, and also helps to underwrite the economic component of redevelopment generally. The state of Florida has a very powerful program for underwriting the cost of cleanup by providing state corporate income tax credits, including an annual tax credit of up to $1 million in costs, eligible costs, which translates to $500,000 in tax credits. There are one-time bonuses that can provide another $500,000, depending on the end use, whether it's affordable housing or healthcare. And then there's a separate one-time bonus for solid waste. Here's how the money works. Tax credits come in on an annual, you spend money on an annual basis on eligible costs. They generate tax credits at the end of the year. When the cleanup is conducted, you get your final tax credit, and then you cash out. Here's an example. We've got a $3 million cleanup over a 3-year period. The way that it works through the waterfall, as I've set it up, we're spending the most money in the first year, $1.5 million, less money in the second year, $1 million, and then we wrap up in the third year with $500,000. Tax credits ultimately get sold, they get monetized and generate cash. And what this very complicated spreadsheet tells you is that on a cash-on-cash basis, if you have one of the two preferred end uses, you can bring back to your clients up to 90 cents of every single dollar that they spend on cleanup. You can put that back in their pocket. That keeps the clients on track, and that keeps you on track as well. There are a lot of intuitive costs. There are a lot of costs, cleanup costs, that are intuitively eligible. There's one that's maybe not so intuitively eligible. I have it here in red. It's what I call the brownfields windfall. And the way that this works is, we all know as environmental professionals that engineering controls are recognized in Chapter 62-780 as a remediation technology. Because they're recognized as a remediation technology, and because slabs and parking lots can constitute an engineering control, they're the classic engineering control, you can represent to your clients who are building warehouses, big box retail, apartment buildings, that if they are leaving impacted soil in place, that the cost of the surfacing material, again, the slabs, the subbase, the parking lot, clean fill and vegetated areas, all of that creates a tax credit that can get monetized at up to 90 cents on the dollar. This is the development windfall that's in brownfields, because this is money that they would be spending anyway. But there's more money in brownfields, which is important to know. This is one of the hidden malpractice risks for environmental professionals. If you're not fluent in all of these opportunities and you fail to surface them to your client, when they ultimately find out about them, which they will, I could have slept at a Holiday Inn, or I could have had a V8. They're going to be calling you up and asking you, why didn't you tell us about this? Another significant incentive in the state of Florida is the 100% sales tax rebate on construction materials for affordable housing. I mentioned earlier, we represent a lot of affordable housing developers. In blue, what I'm showing here is the typical construction budget for a typical affordable housing project in Florida. The way that this works is you take 100% of the local sales tax and the state sales tax on all of the bricks and sticks that's spent on a brownfields project where it involves affordable housing. Using that scenario, we look at anywhere between $900 and $1.4 million in cash that can go back to the developer, literally falling from the sky, an unanticipated windfall. The final economic incentive that I want to bring to your attention that you may or may not know about is the job creation incentive. Requires cleanup, requires a brownfield site rehabilitation agreement, provides for up to $2,500 per job. What I've modeled here is the typical number of jobs that we're seeing on big box logistics, 400 new jobs, which tends to create a refund opportunity of $1 million in cash. It's paid out over 4 years from the state, and that spreadsheet models the financial return relative to schedule.
2 minutes plus question.
2 minutes plus questions. Okay. This next series of slides, which I'll hope to get through very quickly, speaks to the significant risk that I see for environmental consultants in the environmental redevelopment field. I mentioned it earlier. There are environmental consultants that are focused on the linear process of cleanup and not so much the nonlinear focus of environmental redevelopment. There are aspects of environmental redevelopment that never get surfaced in a straight cleanup context, such as incremental costs associated with disposing of soil that has to leave a site for construction purposes and not for remediation purposes. The exfiltration of stormwater through contaminated soil. The requirement to properly treat construction effluent that's produced during dewatering. These are issues that are most often at risk when dealing with agricultural sites. For those who do work in Miami-Dade County, you're probably aware of the recently revised assessment guidance for former agricultural sites in Miami-Dade County. There is a heightened scrutiny in Miami-Dade County from a cleanup perspective and from a permitting perspective when we're using ag sites for a different kind of use. The box in the blue is the DERM justification for this additional guidance that can frequently trip up consultants and developers who don't appreciate the way in which this additional level of scrutiny ties into construction planning and permitting. What I've included below the box is the DEP guidance for considerations for stormwater features at conditionally closed sites. That's true for contaminated sites generally that don't have closure. And what will happen is if you haven't properly surfaced the environmental issues, the contamination issues during due diligence because you're heavily relying on the definition of an REC, but subsequent development reveals the presence of contamination, like at a former ag site with no history of discharge, you are going to find out that your permitting application is going to get held up and disapproved, just like the one on the right was, for failure to model the likely impact to a subsurface contamination plume as the result of the infiltration of stormwater. And this next series of slides goes to the DERM criteria for stormwater permitting on contaminated sites. The document to the right is correspondence where the permit was actually denied. And then if I had more time, I would take you through the journey that this particular consultant had to get to closure on the stormwater issue that required significant modeling of fate and transport. Bear with me. That took about $400,000 to get from denial of the initial stormwater permit application to approval as a result of not properly surfacing the environmental conditions during the redevelopment due diligence process. I'm out of time. There is a much more robust presentation here, including a pretty nifty case study or two, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Hopefully you'll be able to address some additional in your presentation tomorrow. Michael is also presenting tomorrow, correct?
Yes.
And several additional counties in the state are looking at the same type of requirements as more and more counties are taking a look at, as you redevelop and change the land use from former agriculture and change it to residential, the criteria are heightening. And one of the reasons that we're seeing all this is developers are buying up all the clean land for development. So our clean land, our green space is being purchased for redevelopment, and we're left with former agriculture. So this is why it's so important the environmental policies that we make now are going to really shape our future. Are there any questions for Michael? We have until about 10:15 maybe at the most.
I have regarding agricultural land, a couple of, well, there are two groups. One includes Nikki Freed, the others, the environmental public employees for environmental. They have documented, I think, that the state, FDEP and the Ag Department are not properly citing violations of BMP on farm. Nikki Freed says she's turned 2,000 of them over to FDEP, the violations, and FDEP, which is the prosecution agency, has not followed up. Now, would that be something that somebody doing some kind of a site report be required to report? Ought they to be looking at them? Are they doing that now? Not so much that there was necessarily a case, but even that there was a report of violation by state inspectors.
Well, that goes into my new defined term, quacks like a duck, REC, right? If there's anything in the file that indicates the presence of subsurface contamination, notwithstanding the fact that a discharge was never documented, in my opinion, it would be malpractice not to bring that to the attention of the user if the user is going to be involved in redevelopment. Again, it's a paradigm shift. If you're representing a user that doesn't intend to change the facts on the ground and wants to go on conducting business as business was always conducted, that's one scenario. The other scenario is you have a party coming in who's going to scrape the land, bring in the backhoes, and will, in theory, be sending a lot of dirt off-site. That dirt is dirty. It needs to go to the proper facility. It doesn't need to go to a residential community for fill because the contractor got paid to provide extra fill. That creates risk for the client, long-term risk because of the cradle to grave liability that is attendant to the disposal of any contaminated media. So your point is very well taken.
One final question for Michael. Okay, well, thank you for attending our panel this morning. And Michael, thank you very much for an informative presentation.